Thank you all.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Hirono.
Thank you very much. As we wrestle with what kind of regulation or parameters we should put on the training and AI, it just seems to make sense that the creators of the content should get some kind of compensation for the use of their material in training the AI platforms. So this is for Mr. Leggett. Don't we already have, do you not already have a lot of expertise, experience in figuring out what would be an appropriate way to license for copyrighted material and other, the use of this kind of content? And how would that be applied in the case of AI?
Senator, thank you for the question. Over the last 3 decades, local television broadcasters have literally done thousands of deals with cable and satellite systems across the country for the distribution of their programming. The notion that the tech industry is saying that it is too complicated to license from such a diverse array of content owners just doesn't stand up. We negotiate with some of the largest cable systems in the country. We negotiate with small mom and pop cable systems. And the result of that is that instead of just doing national deals with our networks, our broadcast networks, or news organizations in New York and LA, every local community in the country is served by a locally focused broadcast station, and that station's programming is carried on the local cable and satellite system. So we have a lot of experience here. Similarly, on the radio side, there are licensing organizations. Mr. Lynch referred to this in his testimony that allow for collective licensing of songwriter rights, performing rights. All of this, our industry has been in the center of both as a licensor and licensee and has been tremendously beneficial.
Do we need to enact legislation for this kind of licensing procedures to be put together and implemented?
I think it is premature. Some of the discussion around legislation thus far in the hearing has been about reaffirming the application of current law. If we have clarity that current law applies to generative AI, let's let the marketplace work. And we have every reason to believe the marketplace will work, but I think it is incumbent on this subcommittee to pay careful attention to these court decisions and also the way that the tech industry is treating the current law in the interim, because as we've said, if it's an arm race of who can spend the most on litigation, we know that the tech industry beats out everyone else.
This is also for Ms. Coffey. So do you think that for both of you, do you think that current law, the application of current law should sort of be left and determined by what cases, lawsuits that have been filed? How do we clarify that current law applies in the AI situation?
So we submitted a lot of recommendations for the record that have to do with transparency, that have to do with accountability, supporting legislation that's already pending, that have to do with competition, going to previous references to the search and tying to AI. When it comes to licensing, there is already a healthy ecosystem, as my colleagues have said, and there's also already a market when it comes to newspapers because we have archives that have existed over hundreds of years that we've spent a lot of money to digitize so that you can find the history. As far as the current existing market and the current law, I would encourage these licensing agreements and arrangements between AI developers and news publishers so that we can avoid protracted litigation that's not good for either industries.
But for that to happen, do you agree that we don't need to enact legislation? We should wait to see how things turn out a little bit longer before we take steps that may end up with some unintended consequences?
There are things that Congress can do at this time around copyright law to ensure responsibility. But as far as what's pending in the courts, at this time, we do believe we have the law behind us and we have the protection in the current law.
These technologies should be licensing our content. If they are not, Congress should act. But under current law, they should be doing it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to start by thanking the Chairman Coons, and Ranking Member Tillis for having this hearing because, as everyone has acknowledged, the Supreme Court decisions in Mayo and Alice have really created a mess relating to patent eligibility, and the hope is that this legislation will provide some level or a lot of predictability to the patent system. So having said that, though, nothing is ever particularly simple. And I did write down that Mr. Iancu said that the manipulation of nature by human beings should be patentable. That sounds very reasonable. Mr. Johnson, I think you mentioned that a lot of things can be eligible, but that doesn't mean that a patent will be forthcoming. So would you say that regarding what Mr. Iancu said, that should be patentable, that goes to eligibility, that doesn't necessarily mean that a patent will ensue?
Absolutely. It may be that the manipulation is not new. It may mean that it's obvious and not worthy of patenting, or it may be that the invention isn't described pursuant to the requirements of Section 112, and so it may fail for other reasons.
So this is, thank you, because that's what is eligible to be patented. I want to make clear it doesn't mean that a patent will ensue. There are other factors that the Patent Office will
Absolutely.
consider. Question for Ms. Brinkerhoff and Mr. Blaylock. So some critics of this legislation, notably the ACLU, argues that it would allow patents for human genes and other natural materials. Proponents of the bill respond that it explicitly makes ineligible patents on unmodified human genes and natural material. But critics reply that there is an exception making eligible any gene or natural material that have been isolated. Question to both of you. What are some examples of genes or natural materials that you expect to be patent eligible under this legislation that are not eligible currently?
I'll start and I'll leave the genes to you.
Ms. Brinkerhoff?
So some examples, as I mentioned, are isolated. When you discover a chemical from a plant that could have use as a therapeutic agent, that would be a natural product that cannot be patented now, that would be restored to eligibility under PIRA. Other examples are the bacteria that I discussed, where the bacteria may be found in certain areas of the world, like cold-tolerant bacteria may be found in the North Pole, but those are found to have specific useful properties that make them useful in industrial applications, and those would be restored to eligibility under PIRA that cannot be patented now.
Mr. Blaylock, do you think that is reasonable, that the items that Ms. Brinkerhoff has mentioned should be patentable?
I don't, and if I may, I'd like to extend this to the concept of genes, which you also asked about, and to use that example, that if one were to observe newly a particular genetic mutation that is associated with a disease risk, that the question is, how would PIRA make that patentable? Because the only thing that is new is that knowledge. Because isolation, purification, and enrichment are ordinary aspects of conventional genetic sequencing technology. So one would take a blood sample from a human, take an off-the-shelf commercial aluminum machine, and it would isolate, purify, and enrich that gene, and the PIRA would allow patenting that would stop the exploitation of that new knowledge. There is no other human involvement in that other than recognizing the knowledge.
Ms. Brinkerhoff, would you like to rebut?
Thank you. Yes, I think he underestimates the inventive contribution of figuring out that there is a new gene with a new purpose, a new function that hasn't been discovered or known before. So I think that is an inventive act that warrants patent protection.
That's why things are not simple. But I think we all agree that at least that the current situation is a mess. So I agree with that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman, as we've heard, children face all sorts of dangers when they use social media, from mental health harms to sexual exploitation, even trafficking. Sex trafficking is a serious problem in my home state of Hawaii, especially for Native Hawaiian victims. That social media platforms are being used to facilitate this trafficking, as well as the creation and distribution of C-SCAM is deeply concerning, but it's happening. For example, several years ago, a military police officer stationed in Hawaii was sentenced to 15 years in prison for producing C-SCAM as part of his online exploitation of a minor female. He began communicating with this 12-year-old girl through Instagram. He then used Snapchat to send her sexually explicit photos and to solicit such photos from her. He later used these photos to blackmail her. And just last month, the FBI arrested a neo-Nazi cult leader in Hawaii who lured victims to his Discord server. He used that server to share images of extremely disturbing child sexual abuse material interspersed with neo-Nazi imagery. Members of his child exploitation and hate group are also present on Instagram, Snapchat, X, and TikTok, all of which they use to recruit potential members and victims. In many cases, including the ones I just mentioned, your companies played a role in helping law enforcement investigate these offenders. But by the time of the investigation, so much damage had already been done. This hearing is about how to keep children safe online, and we've listened to all of your testimony, to seemingly impressive safeguards for young users. You try to limit the time that they spend. You require parental consent. You have all of these tools, yet trafficking and exploitation of minors online and on your platforms continues to be rampant. Nearly all of your companies make your money through advertising, specifically by selling the attention of your users. Your product is your users. As a Meta product designer wrote in an email, quote, "Young ones are the best ones. You want to bring people to your service young and early," end quote. In other words, hook them early. Research published last month by Harvard School of Public Health estimates that Snap makes an astounding 41% of its revenues by addressing to users under 18. With TikTok, it's 35%. 7 of the 10 largest Discord servers, attracting many paying users, are for games used primarily by teens, by children. All this is to say that social media companies, yours and others, make money by attracting kids to your platforms. But ensuring safety doesn't make money, it costs money. If you are going to continue to attract kids to your platforms, you have an obligation to ensure they are safe on the platforms, because the current situation is untenable. That is why we're having this hearing. But to ensure safety for our children, that costs money. Your companies cannot continue to profit off young users, only to look the other way when those users, our children, are harmed online. We've had a lot of comments about Section 230 protections. And I think we are definitely heading in that direction. And some of the 5 bills that we have already passed out of this committee talks about limiting the liability protections for you. Last November, this is for Mr. Zuckerberg. Last November, the Privacy Technology Subcommittee heard testimony from Arturo Behar in response to one of my questions about how to ensure that social media companies focus more on child safety. He said, and I am paraphrasing a little bit. Mr. Behar said, what will change their behavior is at the moment that Mark Zuckerberg declares earnings, And these earnings have to be declared to the SEC. So he has to say, last quarter we made $34 billion, and the next thing he has to say is how many teens experienced unwanted sexual advances on his platform. Mr. Zuckerberg, will you commit to reporting measurable child safety data on your quarterly earnings reports and calls?
Senator, it's a good question. We actually already have a quarterly report that we issue and do a call to answer questions for how we're enforcing our community standards. That includes not just the child safety issues and metrics.
So is that a yes?
We have a separate call that we do this on, but we've led
Well, I
the
think
industry.
that
and
you have to report your earnings to the SEC. Will you report to them this kind of data, and by numbers, by the way, because Senator Cruz said, and others have said, percentages don't really tell the full story. Will you report to the SEC the number of teens, and sometimes you don't even know whether they're teens or not because they just claim to be adults. Will you report the number of underage children on your platforms who experience unwanted CSAM and other kinds of messaging that harm them? Will you commit to citing those numbers to the SEC when you make your quarterly report?
Well, Senator, I'm not sure it would make as much sense to include it in the SEC filing, but we file it publicly so that way everyone can see this. And I'd be happy to follow up and talk about what specific metrics. I think the specific things that some of the ones that you just mentioned around underage people on our services, we don't allow people under the age of 13 on our service. So if we find anyone who's under the age of 13, we remove them from our service. Now, I'm not saying that people don't lie and that there aren't anyone who's under the age of 13 who's using it, but we're not going to be able to count how many people there are, because fundamentally, if we identify that someone is underage, we remove them from the service.
I think that's really important that we get actual numbers, because these are real human beings. That's why all these parents and others are here, because each time that a young person is exposed to this kind of unwanted material and they get hooked, it is a danger to that individual. So I'm hoping that you are saying that you do report this kind of information to, if not the SEC, that it is made public. I think I'm hearing that, yes, you do. So,
yes, Senator, I think we report more publicly on our enforcement than any other company in the industry. And we're very supportive of transparency measures.
I am running out of time, Mr. Zuckerberg, but so I will follow up with what exactly it is that you do report. Again, for you, when Meta automatically places young people's accounts, and you testified to this, on the most restrictive privacy and content sensitivity sessions, and yet teens are able to opt out of these safeguards. Isn't that right? Yeah. It's not mandatory that they remain on these settings. They can opt out.
Senator, yes, we default teens into a private account so that they have a private and restricted experience, but some teens want to be creators and want to have content that they share more broadly, and I don't think that that's something that should just blanketly be banned.
Why not? I think it should be mandatory that they remain on the more restrictive settings.
Senator, I think that there's a lot of teens create amazing things, and I think with the right supervision and parenting and controls, I think that's I don't think that that's the type of thing that you want to just not allow anyone to be able to do. I think you want to make it so that
my time is up, but I have to say that there is an argument that you all make for every single thing that we are proposing, and I share the concern that I have about the blanket limitation on liabilities that we provide all of you, and I think that has to change, and that is on us, on Congress, to make that change. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hirono, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To ensure the fitness of nominees to serve, I ask the following two initial questions of all nominees who appear before any of the committees on which I sit. Since you became a legal adult, have you ever made unwanted requests for sexual favors or committed any verbal or physical harassment or assault of a sexual nature?
No, Senator.
Have you ever faced discipline or entered into a settlement related to this kind of conduct?
No, Senator.
Admiral, you noted the importance of our allies and partners as a very critical aspect of our asymmetric advantage. and this includes our compact nations partnerships. So I'd like you to acknowledge the importance of congressional action in support of our negotiated compacts with Palau, Micronesia, and the Marshall Islands.
The Compact of Free Association is absolutely critical for multiple reasons. The first is the People's Republic of China is attempting to drive a wedge through traditional partnerships and through traditional people-to-people ties across the Pacific. They employ corruption and elite capture to do so. The COFA states, on top of a moral duty as a result of years and years of partnership with the COFA states, our historical ties, our people-to-people ties. In fact, a little-known point is that young people from the COFA states enlist in the U.S. Armed Services at higher rates than U.S. citizens do. And I've had the honor of serving with Yap Islanders, Truk Islanders, and Pohnpei Islanders throughout the course of my career. And then finally, in accordance with the sovereign wishes of the COFA states, they offer tremendous potential for a theater posture that will aid the joint force and the allied force in achieving the principles of expanded maneuver in conflict in the Western Pacific.
Thank you for acknowledging the importance, and we have this year, we have the important duty to approve these compacts, and let's get it done. I know that you are aware of my focus on infrastructure. I've had discussions with you, and of course, I mentioned what happened at Red Hill. And so, over the last few years in Hawaii alone, there have been water main breaks, power outages, and spills, including, of course, the catastrophic events at Red Hill, as well as necessary dry dock replacement. Although you will not be directly responsible for improving infrastructure in Hawaii, yours will be an important voice on the issue, especially as it impacts readiness. If confirmed, how do you intend to approach the infrastructure challenges in the region, including in Hawaii?
Senator, if confirmed, the first is a critical eye with worst-case thinking. And that's a critical eye to look at the critical infrastructure and have a risk management standpoint that looks instead of saying, I hope it's going to be okay, the approach to say, how can this go wrong? You mentioned the water main. When we unearthed that water main, we found that it was 75 years old. Red Hill itself was 80 years old at the time. This focus on critical infrastructure is going to require critical thinking. It's going to require integration among the components and leaders holding each other to account and holding the services to account to ensure that the foundation of the joint forces, the bases, the piers, the airfields, the refueling points are going to support combat operations and by doing so support deterrence.
You mentioned that your father was a shipyard worker, so I know that you have an appreciation of the importance of the 4 public shipyards, including Pearl Harbor, and one of the biggest issues that we're going to face is the dry dock replacement to enable us to repair and maintain our ships. So that is an infrastructure that I would like you to pay particular attention to as we go forward. I mentioned Red Hill as symptomatic of the importance of public engagement, and I'd like your commitment that you will continue to focus on how important it is to basically repair the breakdown in trust and questions that arose as a result of the handling of the Red Hill situation. So I would like your public commitment that you will continue to focus on restoring trust between the people of Hawaii and our military in Hawaii.
If confirmed, I commit myself to it, Senator.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Hirono.
Thank you.
From Hawaii. Welcome.
Hello, everybody. I come from the state that I think has the most ambitious alternative energy goals of any state. We want to be totally fossil fuel free by 2045. And when you put out an ambitious goal like that, private sector investments will follow, as it has and continues to in Hawaii. I remember when the Green New Deal was introduced 5 years ago, that was deemed extremist, controversial. I had to defend signing on to that bill. Can you imagine, as we stand here talking about how important this bill was and how it is setting the stage? But at that time, it was deemed pushy, controversial, etc. Well, I call it visionary. I call it looking to the future. When I'm asked, what do young people care about? They care about a lot of really important things, but one critical thing they care about is climate change and what kind of world we're going to be living in. And that is why they look at the Green New Deal. They look at all of the leaders here as well as others who couldn't join us today. Alexandria, my hat is off to you and my colleagues in the House and Senate because it takes leadership from all of you and all of us to continue this fight. We cannot say that, the battle has been won. In fact, most of the battles that we thought we had won don't stay won. So eternal vigilance is required of all of us. And yes, we have made tremendous progress. I see Ron Wyden there. We passed a huge bill, more investment in fighting climate change than in the history of our country. Think about that. And that battle continues. But especially, I want to say thank you to my colleagues and to all of the young people who are expecting leadership from us, continued leadership from us, and that they care about climate change. And that's why we're going to continue to work together, holding hands and moving forward to save our planet. Aloha.
Thank you. Thank you, Mazie. Now we're going to hear from Kanyella Ng, the
President, today marks 6 months since fire tore through Lahaina and upcountry Maui. We continue to see the heart and resilience of our communities as we recover and remember the lives lost. As recovery efforts continue, I am grateful to the thousands of people who have come together from literally all over the world to support our neighbors on Maui. Maui's recovery will take time, resources, and continuity of effort. I will keep working with my partners to ensure Maui has the resources it needs to recover and rebuild. On a separate, very important note, Mr. President, the National Security Supplemental Package we are debating demonstrates our strong support for our allies at a time of rising global instability, recognizing that an investment in our partners is also an investment in our own national security. While the funding for Ukraine, Israel, and the Indo-Pacific currently included in this bill is critical, missing from this bill is the text of the recently renegotiated Compact of Free Association. Agreements with the Pacific Island nations, Palau, Micronesia, and the Marshall Islands. In exchange for economic assistance, the Compacts of Free Association provide our country with exclusive military access to these countries and their territorial waters. With their strategic location in the South Pacific, these countries provide a strategic buffer between the United States and China. At a time of rising tensions in the Pacific, these compacts are a critical component of our ability to operate in the Pacific, especially as we work to counter China's growing influence in this region. Our military leaders have unanimously pointed out the importance of these compacts. Most recently, Admiral Paparo, nominated to lead U.S. military operations in the Indo-Pacific, reiterated the importance of the compacts in his confirmation hearing recently. These compacts date back more than 40 years, but our relationship with these island nations dates back to World War II. First agreed to in the early 1980s, the compacts have to be renegotiated and approved by Congress every 20 years. Over the past 4 years, U.S. negotiators have worked with their counterparts in the COFA nations to agree to new compacts that will govern our relationship with these countries for the next 20 years. Imagine if we get this done with this bill,
we will have accomplished what we need to do in our relationship and support for our compact nation allies for the next 20 years. Mr. President, these compacts have broad bipartisan support, including from both the chairs and ranking members of the Foreign Relations, Armed Services, and Energy and Natural Resources committees. These are the committees of jurisdiction over these compacts. They understand how critical these agreements are to our posture and readiness in the Pacific. And the harmful message, frankly, the harmful message it would send if we do not get these compacts agreed to. Now, believe me, China is watching to see what we do in our support for our island friends. And in fact, just this week, the presidents of all three compact nations, Palau, Micronesia, and the Marshall Islands, sent a letter to Congress in which they wrote, quote, although we understand the delay in the legislation's approval, it has generated uncertainty among our peoples. As much as they identify with and appreciate the United States, this has resulted in undesirable opportunities for economic exploitation by competitive political actors active in the region. Of course, they are talking about China. As I mentioned, China is watching and would love nothing more than for the U.S. to fall or to fail to pass these compacts. Failure for the U.S. would present China with a golden opportunity to bring the COFA nations close to their sphere of influence, significantly undermining our credibility and ability to operate in this region. Beyond the serious national security implications of the compacts, nearly 100,000 citizens of the COFA nations live, work, and pay taxes in our country. Moreover, COFA citizens enlist in our military at higher rates than U.S. citizens. With this bill, we stand with our allies, yes, but the compact nations are our allies in the Pacific. We're not just talking about our allies in Europe. These compact nations are our allies in the Pacific, just as important to our national security. We are introducing an amendment with strong bipartisan support to add to this bill the text of the compacts. And I thank Senator Risch, the lead sponsor of this amendment, for his leadership and partnership in this effort. As we work to support our allies around the globe, I urge my colleagues to stand with our COFA partners and support our amendment. Mr. President, I yield.
Nation by current and former prosecutors in the Department of Justice. The letter says the undersigned state and federal prosecutors and Department of Justice officials hold diverse political ideologies and affiliations, yet we do share an unwavering respect and admiration for Amir Ali. Without objection, that will be entered into the record. Senator Hirono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations to each of you and welcome to all of your friends and family. To ensure the fitness to serve of the nominees who come before any of the committees on which I sit, I ask the following two initial questions, and we'll just go right down the line, starting with Mr. Ali. Since you became a legal adult, have you ever made unwanted requests for sexual favors or committed any verbal or physical harassment or assault of a sexual nature?
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
Have you ever faced discipline or entered into a settlement related to this kind of conduct?
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
There have been a number of questions to Mr. Ali regarding defunding the police, and I just want to note for the record, Mr. Chairman, that there is a letter of support that he received from the Law Enforcement Action Partnership, a nonprofit of law enforcement officials advocating for policies to make communities safer. I'd like to note that for the record. Mr. Ali, throughout your career, you have dedicated substantial time to pro bono service, and the McCarthy Justice Center, which you lead, provides all of its legal representation free of charge to clients. Why is access to legal services so important to you?
Thank you, Senator. I believe that access to legal services and the services provided by the Justice Center in its advocacy is essential to the rule of law. I think that often, understandably, people think of the outcome of cases when they think of the rule of law. But there's also the process. And our adjudicative system is dependent upon quality counsel on both sides of every case to get to the right outcome.
Well, I do agree with you. Ms. Yoon, as a first-generation Korean American, if confirmed, you would be the first Asian American federal judge in the state of Virginia. Pretty amazing, all of the number of firsts, thanks to this president and his commitment to a diverse and representative judiciary. Why is diverse representation on the bench so important to you?
Thank you, Senator. I think for two reasons. One is that it certainly increases confidence in our judiciary when people can look to the bench and know that the diversity on the bench reflects the diversity of the constituents. And second, I think the role modeling function of the judiciary is absolutely important. And I think having a diversity in all its kinds and forms is important so that people can know that their interests will be well heard and that the judiciary will take up their concerns without any bias. And for those reasons, I think the diversity on the bench is really important.
Judge DuBose, it's really interesting to me that you taught for a number of years. How many years did you teach?
Thank you, Senator. So just about 10 years.
So we don't often have nominees who have been teachers. So that must have been a very challenging experience to be a teacher. So have those experiences as a teacher informed your work as a judge?
Thank you for the question. I would say that my teaching experience has informed and molded every aspect of my professional life. The skills of a classroom teacher standing before 25 to 30 students who are coming into class with varying degrees of trauma, hopes, dreams, joys, and you're trying to focus them with a common mission. It takes a lot of patience and the ability to listen. And so meeting my students where they were really has helped me to become an active listener, but also someone who can empathize with the folks that I'm working with.
Thank you. For Mr. Hajani, you have presided over several naturalization ceremonies, and in the very court, your own parents were naturalized. Would you like to share with us what it was like for you to preside over these services for your own parents?
Senator, thank you for that question. It's been an absolute joy and pleasure to preside over naturalization ceremonies for our court. It's one of the proudest moments for us judges to be able to naturalize hundreds of citizens to become Americans. And as you noted, my own parents were naturalized in the court that I sit in now. And I tell that story to new folks who want to become citizens, and I tell them that anything is possible in America. The fact that I am there before them, naturalizing them, is proof of the American dream, that if you work hard and you study and you take care of your neighbors and you do your best, your American dream will come true. And I look at their eyes and they are also thankful for that opportunity and the journey they had to get to America, which is not an easy journey. A lot of waiting, a lot of patience, a lot of worry. But they make it, and those days are days that I remember.
I agree. And Ms. Yoon, you've gone through that proceeding yourself, as have I. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations to each of you. Mr. Alley.
Senator Hirono, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We know that there is a workforce shortage in just about every business, every industry, from restaurants to the defense industry. This is for Mr. Taylor. The DoD has established the Defense Civilian Training Corps to attract top talent into the defense ecosystem and specifically relating to acquisitions. So how is this training corps doing in terms of attracting the kind of people that the defense industry needs?
Thank you for the question. I think Dr. Locke would be more familiar with that particular DTC program.
Thank you. I'll note that there are actually currently several STEM employment workforce coordination programs going on in the Department of Defense, and certainly that one's among them. I believe that these programs would be far more effective if there was a greater degree of coordination among them. For example, sharing of hiring objectives and even of candidates. Likewise, to the other senator's point earlier, providing metrics for such programs would be very important.
Well, why isn't there coordination? Why aren't there metrics to measure the effectiveness of these programs? Whose responsibility is it to ensure those aspects are addressed?
Thank you for the question. As to the particular statutory authority, I'll take that for the record. I will note that a mandate to coordinate among programs to share best practices, to ensure that these programs are appropriately targeted to market and are adequately innovating would be very effective, and I believe that's something that the Congress and the Senate in particular can draw greater attention to.
Okay, you can help us, my staff, to better focus on some of those kinds of changes if we need to change. Mr. Taylor, I was particularly gratified that you mentioned that if we want people to have STEM experiences in education, that it's really something that we should look at from pre-K to 12, and that we also should pay attention to diversity. So yes, Senator Rosen has a bill that would encourage, I think, more emphasis on these kinds of programs. I have a bill that would focus on women and minorities in STEM education. What ideas do you have that would focus us on the need for paying attention to K-12 and onward if we want more people to be STEM educated?
So thank you for that question. I had the good fortune of once running what was called the Thurgood Marshall College Fund, which represents the country's publicly supported historically black colleges and universities, 47 of them. In fact, Mr. Gates here was my colleague. We specifically created a program where we went into 3 markets that were largely populated with historically underrepresented people, and we took kids who were between the ages of, and I want to get the numbers right, 9 and 13, with a specific focus on taking those kids in after-school programs that were STEM-oriented, to expose those children and their families and to STEM careers, but more importantly, the importance of taking certain types of curriculum early on, so that by the time, if you wanted to go to college to be an engineer, there are things you needed to do in high school, courses you had to take, et cetera. So we mapped them. We gave them, oftentimes their families didn't have parents who were college graduates, or if they were college graduates, they weren't STEM college graduates. We literally took those kids and we followed them through 10th grade, preparing them up to and including taking the SAT, ACT, et cetera. So those sorts of programs helped us yield a significantly higher number of future STEM workers from those communities than would have without them.
So you're saying that we have to be very intentional about how we're going about it, and that you have some longitudinal data that shows that when you are this focused, that you will have people going into the STEM areas. Because, for example, women and minority people drop out of the STEM pipeline at every step of the way, because especially for women, for example, there are not very many models for women in STEM. And in terms of workforce training, we are building a dry dock at Pearl Harbor Shipyard. It is the biggest infrastructure project that the DoD is engaged in. It is $3.5 billion. I hope that it will come in at that price. But they had a hard time finding workers for this project. Some 2,000 plus workers will be needed to build this dry dock over the next 2 years or so.
And in the meantime, we have an apprenticeship program for the Pearl Harbor Naval Shipyard, one of 4 public shipyards that we have. They had 2,500 applicants for 152 positions. So obviously, there are a lot of people who want to get this kind of training so they can be in the pipeline to work in our shipyards, but we're not creating enough spaces for them. Do any of you have any ideas what we can do to accommodate these young people who want to be trained in our workforce? Anyone?
Yes. It's already been mentioned by a few of my colleagues here, but school to work training pipelines and close public-private partnerships with educational institutions are very effective at establishing firm pipelines for workers. We've demonstrated this many times in the private sector, particularly in the auto industry, in some of the states represented here, reinforcing the training at community colleges and trade schools and linking those skilled professions directly into where the jobs are needed.
Senator, apprenticeships powered by AI. I think that's where the future is, and that's what the private sector is not going to do enough without your prompting.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Hirono. Senator Mullen, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome to all of you and your friends and families. Congratulations on your nominations. In addressing the fitness to serve of nominees who come before any of the 5 committees on which I sit, I ask the following 2 initial questions, and we'll just go right down the line with Judge Bosara. Since you became a legal adult, have you ever made unwanted requests for sexual favors or committed any verbal or physical harassment or assault of a sexual nature?
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
Have you ever faced discipline or entered into a settlement related to this kind of conduct?
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
Judge Bosara, I think it's very important for our judiciary to reflect the diversity of the people who live in our country. And would you agree with that, that it is important that our judiciary reflect the kind of diversity of the people in our country and why?
I think a diverse judiciary, diverse judicial staff helps instill confidence in the people who come before the court that the process is fair and equal and open to everyone.
And at the same time, I would think for all of you that it is very important that our judges approach each case with an idea of being fair and objective and applying the applicable precedent. Do you agree that that is what we would want our judges to do?
Yes, Senator.
Yes, Senator.
Yes, Senator.
Yes, Senator.
I was very taken with the fact, Mr. Schulte, that you are a poet. And I have some of your poems, in fact, that my staff gave to me. And I consider poetry to be a creative endeavor. In fact, I think for all of us, I continuously encourage my staff, and it applies to myself, to be creative and to go to refer to the arts as a way to maintain a certain equilibrium. Is that what poetry does for you? I mean, in fact, what does poetry do for you?
It does, Senator. That's what poetry does for me. I was taken with poetry at a very young age and recently had some published for the first time in my life. But I take great interest in poetry. It relaxes me. I believe it stimulates my mind. I'm an amateur poet, to be crystal clear. I'm an amateur poet, but I'm a big fan of the great American poets, Mary Oliver, Ted Kooser, former poet laureate of the United States, and Jim Harrison.
Do you have a favorite poet?
It would probably be Mary Oliver, Senator. She would be my favorite poet.
Oh, I came across her kind of recently. So, okay, let me keep up that work. In fact, at a time when we are facing so many challenges, I believe that really paying attention to the right brain creative aspects of our beings, which we all have, I think that really helps us to deal with the fast-changing world. Judge Coggins, thank you for talking about some of the juvenile cases that you have confronted, and I think that you referred to your court as a juvenile. I'm sorry. What was it? Is that a special kind of court that you sit on?
That is correct.
Trauma response court. I had never heard of a court like that, and so you get all of the trauma cases that
Yeah.
involve juveniles?
That's correct. And so I sit over the Juvenile Trauma Response Court, which is juveniles who have had significant trauma. They are often in both courts, the delinquency court and the dependency court, and there is a robust treatment team for those juveniles, as well as the juveniles that appear in my commercially sexually exploited children calendar as well, in the juvenile delinquency calendar.
So you deal with some of the most challenging, emotionally charged cases.
I believe that's true for all of the juvenile court judges, but my docket is specialized in significant trauma.
So do you think that other states should have, I had not heard of a trauma court, do you think other states should have this kind of specialized court?
Other states do have the specialized courts. They're considered as collaborative courts. Other states also have mental health courts for juveniles, as well as substance use treatment courts for juveniles. All are very important because these juveniles are at risk, and we want to ensure that they receive the appropriate treatment and rehabilitation so they can be upstanding citizens and ensure the safety of our community.
Thank you for that explanation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Hirono.
Mr. Chairman, welcome to all of you and your friends and families. Congratulations on your nominations. In addressing the fitness to serve of nominees who come before any of the 5 committees on which I sit, I ask the following 2 initial questions, and we'll just go right down the line with Judge Basara. Since you became a legal adult, have you ever made unwanted requests for sexual favors or committed any verbal or physical harassment or assault of a sexual nature?
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
Have you ever faced discipline or entered into a settlement related to this kind of conduct?
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
Judge Basara, I think it's very important for our judiciary to reflect the diversity of the people who live in our country. And would you agree with that, that it is important that our judiciary reflect the kind of diversity of the people in our country and why?
I think a diverse judiciary, diverse judicial staff helps instill confidence in the people who come before the court that the process is fair and equal and open to everyone.
And at the same time, I would think for all of you that it is very important that our judges approach each case with an idea of being fair and objective and applying the applicable precedent. Do you agree that that is what we would want our judges to do?
Yes, Senator.
Yes, Senator.
Yes, Senator.
Yes, Senator.
I was very taken with the fact, Mr. Schulte, that you are a poet. And I have some of your poems, in fact, that my staff gave to me. And I consider poetry to be a creative endeavor. In fact, I think for all of us, I continuously encourage my staff, and it applies to myself, to be creative and to go to refer to the arts as a way to maintain a certain equilibrium. Is that what poetry does for you? I mean, in fact, what does poetry do for you?
It does, Senator. That's what poetry does for me. I was taken with poetry at a very young age, and recently had some published for the first time in my life. But I take great interest in poetry. It relaxes me. I believe it stimulates my mind. I'm an amateur poet, to be crystal clear. I'm an amateur poet, but I'm a big fan of the great American poets, Mary Oliver, Ted Kooser, former poet laureate of the United States, and Jim Harrison.
Do you have a favorite poet?
It would probably be Mary Oliver, Senator. She would be my favorite poet.
I came across her kind of recently. So, okay, let me keep up that work. In fact, at a time when we are facing so many challenges, I believe that really paying attention to the right brain creative aspects of our beings, which we all have, I think that really helps us to deal with the fast changing world. Judge Coggins, thank you for talking about some of the juvenile cases that you have confronted. And I think that you referred to your court as a juvenile, I'm sorry, what was it? Is that a special kind of court that you sit on?
That is correct.
Trauma response court. I had never heard of a court like that. And so you get all of the trauma cases that involve juveniles?
That's correct. And so I sit over the Juvenile Trauma Response Court, which is juveniles who have had significant trauma. They are often in both courts, the delinquency court and the dependency court, and there is a robust treatment team for those juveniles, as well as the juveniles that appear in my commercially sexually exploited children calendar as well, in the juvenile delinquency calendar.
So you deal with some of the most challenging, emotionally charged cases.
I believe that's true for all of the juvenile court judges, but my docket is specialized in significant trauma.
So do you think that other states should have, I had not heard of a trauma court, do you think other states should have this kind of specialized court?
Other states do have the specialized courts. They're considered as collaborative courts. Other states also have mental health courts for juveniles, as well as substance use treatment courts for juveniles. All are very important because these juveniles are at risk, and we want to ensure that they receive the appropriate treatment and rehabilitation so they can be upstanding citizens and ensure the safety of our community.
Thank you for that explanation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Hirono. Senator Hirono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank everyone for testifying on this really important issue because practically nothing, aside from a woman's right to control her own body, could be as important as voting. And we know that there are all kinds of efforts. After Shelby County, I think some 13 states immediately enacted what I would deem to be voter suppression laws. And these take all kinds of forms. And in fact, it's to make voting harder. Anything that makes voting harder, such as changing the times that people can vote, or changing where people can vote, or restricting the kind of identification that can be used to go and vote. These are all, I think, efforts. These are all efforts to suppress people's votes. So I have a couple of questions relating to what will be happening probably in this election cycle. I did want to ask one of our testifiers a question relating to robocalls. So this is for Mr. Hewitt. Last year, your organization brought to light a racially targeted voter suppression operation in the form of a robocall scheme. Probably these kinds of schemes are going to be utilized in this upcoming election season. I think they're pretty easy to do and maybe not that hard to stop. Can you, Mr. Hewitt, tell us a little bit more about the case that you brought and what kind of robocall was it and who did it target?
Thank you, Senator Hirono. During the 2020 election cycle, we received through the Election Protection Coalition hotline, 866 Our Vote, calls from voters indicating that they were receiving robocalls in which there was apparently a voice actor, we later learned, who was hired to say something to the effect of, if you vote by mail, the information will be used against you to collect outstanding debt, to execute outstanding police warrants, and to force mandatory vaccinations. The kicker line was, don't give your information to the man. We traced this to a gentleman named Jacob Wool and his compatriots, who we learned on the cheap were able to send 85,000 such robocalls, and they tried to target black voters. We filed suit under Section 11B of the Voting Rights Act. These individuals were later prosecuted successfully and convicted, and we won on summary judgment, and we're going after damages from these folks as well. We represented the National Coalition on Black Civic Participation, which had to divert resources to address these issues and re-inform these 85,000 voters about what the law really provided. That was done on the cheap. That was in the 2020 cycle. Today, the same robocall could be done in an AI-assisted way, and it could clone the voices of people like Barack Obama or Morgan Freeman or Oprah Winfrey or anyone who's of notoriety, and people can be fooled. And so we need protection from this. We won our case because that was found to be voter intimidation, but not all mis and disinfo that's designed to chill the vote is going to rise to that level. So we need more protections.
Aren't there bills that have already been introduced that will prevent these kinds of robocalls from occurring?
There certainly are some bills introduced, which we can certainly talk about and figure how we can all rally around and support. There's also action by the executive branch, the FCC, to ban use of robocalls, at least in federal elections, AI-assisted robocalls, that is. And so when we think about how we make it easier to vote, and how do we actually make it harder to stop people from voting, we have to think comprehensively in this way.
Considering that the Voting Rights Act used to be reauthorized in a bipartisan way for decades, and suddenly the Supreme Court decided to become very activist, and the Shelby County pretty much decimated the Voting Rights Act, and then they went on in another case to make it even harder to go after Section 2 violations. So I do have a bill that some of you, your organizations, support, the Time Off to Vote Act. This is a bill that would require employers to provide 2 hours of paid time to vote. So for Mr. Hewitt and Ms. Lacken, your organization support this bill. Can you explain a little bit why you think that this is important, even in places where there is voting by mail?
Yes, absolutely. It's we definitely support this bill. There are far too many people in this country who are unable to take time off of work to be able to access mail balloting, which isn't available in the same way across the country. And so being able to, first of all, recognize the importance of voting, and recognize the importance of employers to provide that opportunity for voters is extraordinarily important and increases access in a way that we absolutely support.
Mr. Hewitt, would you like to add?
Thank you, Senator. We support that bill as well. And as I talk to people in corporate America, we ask them to do the same, whether they're legally required to or not, and also to lift up what they're doing because their reputational capital matters. We want to mainstream not just the active voting, but also the importance of opening up pathways to be able to exercise that right.
This bill already has dozens of sponsors. You know, can one of you submit the list of all the kinds of voter suppression laws that have been enacted across our country? My time is up, but maybe one of you can supply that to us, because voter IDs is just one of many, many ways dozens of ways that voter suppression is taking place in our country.
Thanks, Senator Hirono.
Thank you.
Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the reasons that I was very much awakened to politics as a way to support social changes was on the issue of abortion. I was in college when the state legislature in Hawaii took up the issue of abortion rights. And in fact, the state of Hawaii was the first state to decriminalize abortion before Roe v. Wade. This is an issue that is very fundamental. What could be more fundamental than a person's right to control her own body and to make decisions relating to her body? What could be more invasive than to force us to have babies? I can't think of a single thing that we do basically to men that is as invasive as a bunch of politicians saying to a male person, you have to do this. I can't think of an instance, and yet something as invasive and fundamental as a woman's right to control her own body is under assault. So here comes Dobbs. I never thought I'd live to see the day when we have a Supreme Court majority that just summarily decides that something that I had taken as a constitutional right for almost 50 years, a constitutional right, where they just say, well, it's no longer a constitutional right. What kind of Supreme Court is that if they, the ultimate arbiters of what is constitutional and not constitutional, decides that this right that I had for almost 50 years no longer exists, and you leave it to the politicians in each state to make that decision? I have no words to express what an assault this is on women in our country, to force us to have babies. And now, even for the women who want to have babies, IVF is under assault. So I say, if you don't support abortion, don't get one, but leave the rest of us alone. There are good-hearted people, fair-minded people on both sides of the abortion issue. I acknowledge that. And that is why it should never be a decision that is left up to a bunch of politicians. It's a decision that is so personal and so fundamental that it should be left to the person, individual, and her doctor, if she so chooses. So the ripple effects of Dobbs, never ending. And we know that already people are making decisions as to what states they're going to live in, because if they live in one of the many states that criminalize abortion, they have to travel out of state to get the kind of reproductive health care that they need. And not all women or not all families have that capability. So once again, like the so-called right to abortion, if you were a poor person and lived in a state that did not provide funding for Medicaid abortions, you're pretty much out of luck. Hawaii was one of the few states that provided, that paid for Medicaid abortions, because what is a constitutional right if that right to be exercised depended on your economic situation? So we now have the circumstance where after Dobbs, individuals have to travel out of state to get the abortion care and other reproductive care that they need. And don't tell me that IVF is legal everywhere. If so, why did Alabama have to pass a law that so-called legalizes IVF in that state? And even that is not protective enough, because if I were a clinic providing IVF care, I would definitely not want to take the chance that that Alabama law is going to protect me, just as in Texas, their law protects the right that if the health care, if the life of a woman is endangered, she can get an abortion. Oh, really? I don't think that's the case, because what doctors, what providers are going to take the chance that maybe they did not determine that correctly, and that they have to wait till the woman is practically on death's door in order to deem the protection of her life to be one that would enable her to get an abortion. So, you know, the Dobbs decision has had so much negative effects. Mifepristone. Oh yes, we have a Supreme Court that is about to determine whether or not a medication that more than half of people resort to legally in order to have an abortion, that could very well be banned, because we have a Supreme Court that seems perfectly willing to just eliminate what was deemed a 50-year constitutional right. So I come down to who's going to make the decision on whether or not a woman has a right to make reproductive decisions, bodily autonomy. Is it the woman, or should it be a bunch of us or state legislators? It is so clear to me who should have that decision making. And all of these bills, all of these efforts, and all of these ways and really to say that that this is an issue that good-hearted, right-minded people have very, you know, they come to different conclusions. Yeah, and I say that's right. And that is why we should have bodily autonomy. If you don't support abortion, don't get one. Leave the rest of us alone. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. one of the reasons that I was very much awakened to politics as a way to support social changes was on the issue of abortion. I was in college when the state legislature in Hawaii took up the issue of abortion rights. And in fact, the state of Hawaii was the first state to decriminalize abortion before Roe v. Wade. This is an issue that is very fundamental. What could be more fundamental than a person's right to control her own body and to make decisions relating to her body? What could be more invasive than to force us to have babies? I can't think of a single thing that we do basically to men that is as invasive as a bunch of politicians saying to a male person, you have to do this. I can't think of an instance, and yet something as invasive and fundamental as a woman's right to control her own body is under assault. So here comes Dobbs. I never thought I'd live to see the day when we have a Supreme Court majority that just summarily decides that something that I had taken as a constitutional right for almost 50 years, a constitutional right, where they just say, well, it's no longer a constitutional right. What kind of Supreme Court is that if they, the ultimate arbiters of what is constitutional and not constitutional, decides that this right that I had for almost 50 years no longer exists, and you leave it to the politicians in each state to make that decision? I have no words to express what an assault this is on women in our country, to force us to have babies. And now, even for the women who want to have babies, IVF is under assault. So I say, if you don't support abortion, don't get one, but leave the rest of us alone. There are good-hearted people, fair-minded people on both sides of the abortion issue. I acknowledge that. And that is why it should never be a decision that is left up to a bunch of politicians. It's a decision that is so personal and so fundamental that it should be left to the person, individual, and her doctor, if she so chooses. So the ripple effects of Dobbs, never ending. And we know that already people are making decisions as to what states they're going to live in, because if they live in one of the many states that criminalize abortion, they have to travel out of state to get the kind of reproductive health care that they need. And not all women or not all families have that capability. So once again, like the so-called right to abortion, if you were a poor person and lived in a state that did not provide funding for Medicaid abortions, you're pretty much out of luck. Hawaii was one of the few states that provided, that paid for Medicaid abortions, because what is a constitutional right if that right to be exercised depended on your economic situation? So we now have the circumstance where after Dobbs, individuals have to travel out of state to get the abortion care and other reproductive care that they need. And don't tell me that IVF is legal everywhere. If so, why did Alabama have to pass a law that so-called legalizes IVF in that state? And even that is not protective enough, because if I were a clinic providing IVF care, I would definitely not want to take the chance that that Alabama law is going to protect me, just as in Texas, their law protects the right that if the health care, if the life of a woman is endangered, she can get an abortion. Oh, really? I don't think that's the case, because what doctors, what providers are going to take the chance that maybe they did not determine that correctly, and that they have to wait till the woman is practically on death's door in order to deem the protection of her life to be one that would enable her to get an abortion. So, the Dobbs decision has had so much negative effects. Mifepristone. Oh yes, we have a Supreme Court that is about to determine whether or not a medication that more than half of people resort to legally in order to have an abortion, that could very well be banned, because we have a Supreme Court that seems perfectly willing to just eliminate what was deemed a 50-year constitutional right. So I come down to who's going to make the decision on whether or not a woman has a right to make reproductive decisions, bodily autonomy. Is it the woman, or should it be a bunch of us or state legislators? It is so clear to me who should have that decision making. And all of these bills, all of these efforts, and all of these ways and really to say that that this is an issue that good-hearted, right-minded people have very, they come to different conclusions. Yeah, and I say that's right. And that is why we should have bodily autonomy. If you don't support abortion, don't get one. Leave the rest of us alone. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Very much, Senator Cotton. Senator Hirono, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you both for being here, and Admiral Aquilino. Thank you very much to you and your family for your decades of service. My very best to you in your future endeavors. And also thank you for the courtesies extended to me and my staff during your leadership in Indo-PACOM. You noted several times about the linkage between the PRC and Russia. And just as that alliance is very important to those two nations, our allies are very important. And in the Indo-PACOM area, we have Japan, South Korea, Philippines, India, the United Nations. Our allies are very important to us, and that is why it is important for us to stand with our allies. You've been asked a number of questions about the need for us to support Ukraine, and that is because our allies are important to us, and that every day that goes by that we're not providing the needed support for Ukraine strengthens Putin's hand, and therefore also Xi Jinping's. Would you agree with that?
I do, Senator. Again, a strategic win for President Putin in Ukraine is a strategic win for President Xi in China. And the allies are so important. We are stronger when we're together. There's no doubt. The linkage of our values, our beliefs are critically important.
And that is why our not funding Ukraine is very much of interest to Xi Jinping. Not to mention Putin, of course. You also mentioned that the PRC's military buildup, which has been going on for quite a while. And I think our asymmetric advantage, if you want to describe it that way, in terms of our assets, our planes, our ships, et cetera, has been our technological capabilities in our assets. So do you think we're doing a good job in maintaining our technological advantage in terms of we may have fewer ships, we may have fewer planes, but our technological advantage is there? Do you think we are doing a good job to maintain our technological advantage?
I do believe, Senator, first let me just say, we have the world's greatest fighting force that's ever been seen. That advantage has helped us keep the peace in many places for decades. We do have a technological advantage that is second to none, and the key is maintaining it because the People's Republic of China intends on closing that advantage and ultimately moving in front of us.
I think you know that over the years I've been very focused on the missile defense of Hawaii, and I would just ask you very quickly, there is a provision directing the DoD to develop a comprehensive plan for missile defense of Hawaii. Do you think that Hawaii is currently protected from ballistic cruise and hypersonic threats?
Senator, as you know, it's my responsibility to defend Hawaii. I take that responsibility very clearly and of critical importance. Hawaii is defended from ballistic missiles. Hawaii will be defended from cruise missiles should there be a threat that shows itself in the vicinity. And no one is defended from hypersonic missiles as we sit here today.
Not yet. Working on it, I know. I also note in your written testimony that you addressed the establishment of the Joint Task Force regarding Red Hill, and I want to commend you for the leadership that you provided and working with the community, and you acknowledge the importance of rebuilding trust in the local community with regard to Red Hill, but it goes for our military installations, not just in Hawaii, but everywhere and the need to build community support. And so I commend you for your acknowledging that. You were also asked about our recent support for the COFAs. Now that agreement took many years to decide, and so is there anything more we can do to support in addition to the funds that will be provided to Micronesia, Marshall Islands, and Palau in this agreement? Are there more things we can do to support these island nations, which serve as a bulwark against China in the Indo-Pacific AOR?
Yes, Senator, thanks. We've worked with all of those island nations to do a couple of things. Number one, make sure that they can understand their maritime domain awareness and have situational awareness when threats might be in their vicinity. So that's one aspect. Second, we've provided some understanding on, what might it mean for increased storm severity and other environmental issues that would impact, and we've helped on the construction side to ensure that anything that the Department of Defense builds is resilient against any of those threats. Third, we provide assistance like on Palau. We have a deployment of Seabees that go there and support the future cooperation that we do militarily, as well as some other community service events. So that's what right looks like to me, and we got to continue to do that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator Hirono. Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Admiral, I want to thank you and your wife, Laura.
Chairman, Secretary McCord, Secretary Austin, and General Brown, thank you very much for your service. Secretary Austin, I want to thank you for your leadership regarding Red Hill in Hawaii, and it was the right decision to close this massive World War II fuel storage facility. Admiral Wade and the Joint Task Force have worked diligently alongside the state and federal partners to safely remove all of the fuel from the facility in recent months, but of course, more work remains. What is your view regarding the department's long-term responsibility for the environmental restoration and remediation efforts following the closure of Red Hill to ensure that no contamination of the aquifer that the people of Oahu rely on for drinking water occurs now and in the future attributable to military installations or actions?
Thanks, Senator. Protecting public health and the environment, we're in the communities where we have our troops stationed is a department priority. And, we made a promise to the citizens of Hawaii to conduct any and all necessary environmental remediation around the Red Hill facility. And we're gonna live up to that promise. As you know, as you just pointed out, last month, JTF Red Hill completed its defueling, and so the work has transitioned to the Department of the Navy now for the Red Hill closure efforts, and we're going to stay focused on that, and I will continue to make sure that I get briefed on this routinely. And make sure that we're doing the right things to meet our timelines, but most importantly, make sure that we do the right things in terms of environmental restoration.
Thank you for your continuing commitment, because there will be long-term, I would say, requirements as to monitoring, et cetera. So that brings me to another question that I have for you. I am concerned about the department's ability to hold senior officials accountable following major incidents, such as the fuel leak at Red Hill and the fire on board the U.S. Bonhomme Richard. I am including a provision in this year's NDAA that would create a new investigation category to provide consistency when there is a catastrophic incident resulting in a significant loss of life or billions of dollars in taxpayer money, to ensure those responsible are held accountable for their actions. Would you be amenable to changes in this area, especially for catastrophic incidents such as the ones that I cited?
so that really the investigation and the responsibility issues are before the department as opposed to the services that are involved?
Thank you, Senator. I've seen your correspondence on this issue, and I've asked my people to take a look at this, and certainly we will do so. We'll analyze it and come back and have a discussion with you on where we are. But I really appreciate your continued focus on this.
Thank you very much. I've talked about how important infrastructure is to readiness, and I note that during the last year's posture hearing, you agreed that the military services need to invest in infrastructure to make sure our service members have the facilities they need to execute their mission. However, even in the Indo-PACOM priority theater, there are billions in infrastructure projects in Hawaii alone and the rest of the region, either on a service or Indo-PACOM's unfunded priority list. Secretary Austin, how does the department ensure that infrastructure maintenance and modernization needs are met if there are multiple critical projects in Hawaii and throughout the region that are not being funded in the president's budget?
Well, we have, as you know, Senator, invested a lot into infrastructure throughout the region, and the PDI, the Admiral Aquilino's request for the Pacific Deterrence Initiative this year is some $9.9 billion, and it includes infrastructure projects. And that's on top of the $20 billion that we've requested over the last couple of years in support of the PDI. So we continue to invest in this, and again, in terms of specific projects, the services will have to continue to rank order what their priorities are based upon what their specific budget, what's available in their budget. But this is very important to us, and something that we'll continue to work on.
Well, you testified today that tough choices need to be made, and near-term readiness, which is also making sure that our infrastructure is maintained. I just want to note one more thing. I am concerned about the cost overruns for the critical Dry Dock 3, which is the biggest infrastructure project within the DoD, replacement at Joint Base Pearl Harbor, Hickam. And despite the lessons learned from Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, the cost of Pearl Harbor's dry dock recently increased by over $800 million. No sooner did I go and give a speech about how important this dry dock is that I am confronted by this, what I consider to be a massive cost overrun. How can we, I just want to note that I'd like to hear from you. I'm out of time right now, but we need to be a lot more accurate in planning for infrastructure projects from the beginning to enable us to better estimate how much these costs are going to be, because to go from 1 week to say that this is great, where we learn lessons from Portsmouth, and then 2 weeks later it's 800 million more. So Secretary Austin, I really would like to be assured that we are going to keep track of what's going on with this dry dock infrastructure project in Hawaii, because I have a feeling that I may be confronted with even more costly increases. It is a statement that I'm making, and I expect to be apprised as we go forward.
Absolutely. And you mentioned that this dry dock's important. It is absolutely important. One of the things that happened here was that we didn't fully appreciate the impact of COVID on the supply chains and some other things, and so those effects have lasted longer than we anticipated, and that's part of what's going on here. So,
thank you, Senator. Thank you, Senator Hirono. Senator Rounds, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Approve the Compact of Free Association agreements, which took years to negotiate with the island nations of the Marshall Islands,
Palau, and Micronesia. And these compacts are critical to our national security, especially in the Indo-PACOM AOR. The challenge with these compacts, though, was that it involved 3 departments: yours, state, and the DOD. So you can imagine all the moving parts and the number of chairs and ranking members who had to agree to this. And before Senator Risch leaves, I want to thank him for his part. Hello. Thank you, Senator Risch. He was ranking on foreign relations, very much a supporter of the compacts. And an important part of the compacts was the restoration of federal benefits to the citizens of these compact nations who live in our country. And these compacts are so important that the citizens of these island nations are able to come and live in the United States without the need for visas. They are, as far as I know, the only group of people who are able to do that. But I'm really thankful that the chair of this committee, the ranking member of this committee, and over a dozen chairs and ranking members in both the Senate and the House worked hard to get this done. So, Madam Secretary, I thank you for your support. Moving on. Hawaii experienced an unprecedented degree of devastation from the Maui wildfires that occurred last August. And afterwards, our natural resource managers, like so many others across the country, found that there was not enough native plant material available to adequately revegetate the burned landscapes. In order to address this issue, I have been working on a bill that would establish a national interagency seed and restoration center to enhance the availability of native plant materials across the United States. This would complement your announcement in February about the National Seed Strategy Keystone Initiative. Can you talk a bit about the importance of Congress working with your department on this effort to ensure that land managers all across the country have a consistent supply of regionally appropriate native plant materials?
Yes, thank you, Senator, for your support on that. And, you know, we battle invasive species all over the country, and in Hawaii, it's especially important. Native plants are important. Promoting native plants is a critical way to help prevent against wildfire risk in the face of climate change. I know that the department provided technical assistance on your draft bill to establish a National Interagency Seed and Restoration Center. We remain committed to working with you on this important issue. I remain saddened by what happened in Maui, and we'll do everything we can to help.
And of course, as we face these natural disasters all across the country, I think that the restoration of native plant material is one approach to preventing these kinds of devastations. I know that addressing the missing and murdered native peoples is, especially, of course, the women and girls, is an important issue for you, and is it still an issue that you are addressing? Can you talk a little bit about the progress that is being made to prevent these kinds of what's happening to Native women and girls? And you probably are aware that in Hawaii, 1/4 of the missing children are Native Hawaiian women and girls. So can you update me a bit on your addressing this devastation?
Thank you, Senator. And yes, as you know, we started the Missing and Murdered Unit in 2021, dedicated investigators for this issue, and so far we've investigated 950 missing and murdered persons cases and solved or closed 595 missing persons cases. We're staffing up the MMU. And it continues as 38 of the 63 positions are now filled. We're still working to make sure we can fill all of those positions, and we'll continue to collect and review unsolved cases involving missing and murdered so that we can add other cases. But we're committed to it and appreciate your commitment as
I
well.
want to commend you for your continuing efforts in these lines, and I would assume that you are pursuing prosecution of the perpetrators.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a few other questions for the record that I will submit.
Thank you,
Appreciate
Madam
that.
Chair.
Thank you. Senator Daines.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Secretary Holland.
Chairman. Director Haynes, you have acknowledged Russian interference with our upcoming elections. In another area, I am wondering whether the intelligence community was able to identify Russia's use of social media to put out messages that the Maui wildfire was caused by government, or that the Maui community should not trust FEMA. Was the intel community able to identify Russian use of social media in this regard? And this is an important question because I can, of course, as we experience so many more of these kinds of massive climate disasters or natural disasters, we can expect that Russia will use social media or some other ways to create instability and questions.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question, ma'am. And I don't remember, so we will get you an answer to that. Yeah.
I know that, for example, the Microsoft, for example, was able to discern that Russia was doing this with regard to the Maui wildfire. So I really would like you to address this for me. Now that we know that there's a huge need for people to be able to work in the Intel arena, in the Intel environment. And so both of you, we know that there's a huge need for that. And for General Cruz, the Pacific Intelligence and Innovation Initiative is working to create a local skilled workforce to meet DoD's demand for cyber and intel professionals in Hawaii. There's a huge need in Hawaii for people with this kind of background. How is this working, and how are you also resorting to AI and other means of making your intel collection more efficient and effective? Because there's a huge need for people with this kind of background, but we don't have those people yet. So can you respond to those two questions?
Certainly. As mentioned, I've done several assignments to include 2016 to 2019 as the Director of Intelligence at U.S. Indo-PACOM and Camp Smith, and personally participated in several recruiting events with local universities and in partnership with the National Security Agency and DIA, lots of recruiting, even down into the high school level, to build some local recruiting and local workforce, and then in partnership with the intelligence community, working to develop centers of academic excellence and a recruiting pool as well. So it is absolutely critical. I do not believe we'll be able to fully man the intelligence requirements on island without doing local recruiting and being able to develop the workforce, and the local partners have just been absolutely tremendous. So to your answer there, it's critical to do. We are investing in additional STEM and cyber pay where those kind of skill sets are required, but to your point, we have skill sets that we need all across the board. On the artificial intelligence question about how do we become more efficient, I think what you'll find across the intelligence community is that we are applying AI, and in closed session we can also talk about counter AI, but how can we be the most effective and the most efficient? I'd be happy to walk you through a couple of very specific examples that the Defense Intelligence Agency is currently doing. And then right now we're looking at how do we partner with NGA, NRO, NSA, and DIA to bring almost a system of systems to be able to queue and be much more effective and much more efficient in how do we collect and how do we assess what we're collecting.
Thank you. Director Haynes, you acknowledge that we have critical infrastructure in the private sector, i.e. our electrical grids that are subject to cyber attacks. And you noted that you spent quite a lot of time in this area talking, I suppose, with the state people and the private sector who provide these kinds of grids. But you noted that good cybersecurity practices, such as something as relatively simple as updating the passwords, would be very helpful. Do you know if this is happening, and do you partner with, for example, the Public Utilities Commission in the state of Hawaii and other agencies that actually regulate what these entities do, our electrical, other power entities? But I just want to know something as simple as updating passwords. Do you know if this is happening?
Yeah, so we are not working directly with sort of the utility companies across the United States. It's really DHS in the form of CISA and the Department of Energy and others that are doing that. And we support their work by trying to make sure that they have the intelligence they need to provide warning, but also then to better understand what the questions are that are coming from utilities in this space. And my understanding is that they are working very hard with them to improve their cybersecurity practices, patch vulnerabilities, deal with these issues. But it is just more an observation from our perspective that as we're looking at the attacks that are occurring, particularly against industrial control systems in the country, that the vast majority of them would have been actually prevented if it weren't for those kinds of cybersecurity practices not being what they need to be, and instead using default passwords, weak passwords, not patching the vulnerabilities that are publicly available, and so on.
So is it Department of Homeland Security and basically the Energy Department who would be the people that I should ask?
And yeah, CISA within the Department of Homeland Security, and we can give you, we can work with your staff to make sure you have, exactly who is talking to who, that sort of thing, and if that's helpful for Hawaii.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Hirono. I will recognize Senator Scott, but I will depart shortly for...
Say something in West Virginia. I can't quite speak that language yet, but I'm getting close. Senator Hirono.
Thank you very much. I'm glad that Senator King noted how important it is for us to deal in this space with climate change, because I agree that the insurance industry certainly has gotten it. When you can't afford homeowners insurance because of the need to cover the results of extreme climate disasters, including, I have to say, wildfires, which is what Maui experienced, then, at least we have one major industry that has said we need to deal with climate change, and thank you for agreeing that that's something we have to do. So I'm interested in the importance of clean energy goals. Mr. Gautzmeyer, the analysis firm SMB Global recently released a study on data center power demand that concluded, quote, many of the large technology companies and private equity groups that own and manage data centers have pledged to use green power electricity for their needs, and we expect renewables to ultimately supply a majority of the incremental supply to the facilities, end quote. Can you elaborate on Micron's renewable energy commitments and the role they played in locating new plants Micron is building with the help of the CHIPS and Science Act?
Yeah, so at Micron, we've committed by the end of 2025 to be 100% renewable on our factories in the United States and elsewhere in the world where available. Fortunately, you look at Idaho and New York, the availability of renewables, there was a play. The other thing that we were looking at is entering into co-op solar projects like we did with Idaho Power with the Black Mesa project, which was 40 megawatt project. In addition to that, we'd be looking at additional PPAs or renewable energy credits purchased as well to hit those goals.
So how much of the falling costs of renewable power contribute to Micron setting its energy goals?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
How much did the falling costs of renewable power play into Micron setting its energy goals toward green energy?
Yeah, obviously we look at the cost of energy, and we're in a cost-sensitive business, so we want to continue to drive that and be effective. And fortunately, in the U.S., you can get renewable energy credits. You can look at renewables that are effective today. However, if there's not more generation added onto the grid with the amount of demand that we're talking about, the cost of energy would rise and create problems. So then you'd run into availability issues, reliability issues, and those are the things that we would like to avoid through change here with transmission and additional generation of multiple sources coming online. So solar, wind, battery technology to enable those to be more effective. Geothermal, we've talked about nuclear with the small modular reactors, and other investments that could be done to continue down that path to meet all of the goals that we're looking for.
So I think you are an example of a private company that pays attention to these issues. For Mr. Falk, you described how new data centers could require 3 to 15 times as much power as a more typical industrial plant. Do you think states and utilities should require data centers with such a new demand for power to install energy storage on-site in order to shake back their demand for power from the grid at periods of peak demand?
I think that's an interesting commentary, and it's something we need to look into. I mean, traditionally, and I refer to my colleague, data centers are backed up because of the importance of making sure you have backup power. But I think increasingly, as we look around, I think data centers are more open to doing exactly what you described. I also would want to call to your attention the data center tariff that we filed in Ohio, recognizing that this extraordinary growth needs to be funded fairly by the data centers and not cost shifting to other consumers. We think it's a critically important first step as we move forward with the data center demand we see from the data.
I agree. Mr. Gulsmeyer, do you have a comment on this question?
Unfortunately, right now, we have power conditioning coming into our site, but we don't have any cogeneration or large power backup that could, sustain us through a reliability event. So in the case of a reliability issue, we would see power implication that would impact our production in a negative way.
I have run out of time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you,
Senator Hirono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for testifying. I know that every time we compare pharmaceutical prices, we are told that Europeans pay far, far less. But I do acknowledge, as you said, Professor Mossoff, that our healthcare system is very complicated. You're the only person on the panel who happened to mention that other nations have single-payer systems. In our country, adding to the cost of healthcare is depending on how you get injured and what system is kicking in to take care of you. We have the VA, the largest healthcare program in the country. We have private insurance. We have Medicare. We have Medicaid. In Hawaii, we depending on if you get hurt in an auto injury, then that's another system. So I think that, if you there is no single bullet. And for us to just, I realize that the patent system abuses is part of the problem, but for us to sit here and just point our fingers at the patent system is not going to resolve in the kind of non-silver bullet that we also acknowledge. And in fact, Professor Mossoff, would you like to just very briefly go over why the payer system we have in our country, if you have any information on how much that adds to the cost of healthcare in our country, I would appreciate your thoughts.
Thank you for the question, Senator. I don't have any specific data on the total costs of all of the different complex institutions, public and private, that exist in our healthcare system, except for the fact that I know generally as a scholar it is incredibly complex and it makes other systems look very simple and basic.
Yeah, and I think that if we really wanted to get control over the United States having the highest healthcare costs in the country, we should look at the payer systems that we have in place, but that's not what our focus is right now. It is clear that we do have abuses in the patent system, and I think it is important for us to very carefully target the abuses as opposed to passing legislation that is going to be overbroad. Would you say that some of the bills that we have passed out of this committee precisely target the abuses in the patent system? Anybody wants to weigh in on this? I think you're familiar with some of the bills that have emerged from this committee.
I think the bills are targeted effectively. The bills target citizen petitions. They target pay-for-delay settlements. There are very specific things that these bills go after that I think would undoubtedly improve some of the patent gamesmanship that we've seen. But I don't think these bills go far enough. I think there are numerous other targeted solutions that are simple and would help improve things.
Such as?
Such as have the FDA review every patent that gets submitted to the Orange Book. The FDA currently serves in a purely ministerial role. It doesn't look at the patents. The companies can submit whatever they want. So give the FDA the authority and the resources to review those patents. Force manufacturers, when they submit patents for listing in the Orange Book, submit them for re-examination to the USPTO. Very simple, but making sure that these patents that are listed in the Orange Book aren't being listed improperly.
Would the rest of you agree that those are some so-called simple changes where there's more collaboration, I suppose, information sharing between PTO and FTC, for example?
FDA and PTO, yeah, absolutely. I think that, and also Dr. Feldman's point about the FDA's ministerial, so-called ministerial role could be fixed really readily and inexpensively if the FDA and PTO collaborated on every patent that was listed on the Orange Book to ensure that it's properly listed. This is a gap in the system that has existed for decades, and it's really unclear, to me at least, why this gap has not been filled.
Thank you for that suggestion. I have a question for Dr. Feldman. Last year, insulin prices were cut dramatically after surpassing the rate of inflation year after year. In a paper last year, you cataloged the, quote, the rise and fall of the insulin pricing bubble. I'm not talking about the situation where the legislation capped the insulin costs for Medicare. This has to do with insulin costs for everybody else. Can you give us some insight into why prices rose so high, why they fell so dramatically, and whether that experience points the way toward possible policy solutions we can use for other high overpriced pharmaceuticals?
Thank you for the question, Senator. The reason why the prices of insulin rose so dramatically is because the three large insulin manufacturers obtained numerous patents to limit competition. They raised prices year after year, many times the original prices of these products. And the reason why prices came down so suddenly is that a rule in Medicaid lifted the cap on rebates, on penalties that these companies were going to have to pay. So previously it was capped at 100%, where if a patient used one of these old insulin products in Medicaid, because they had raised prices faster than rate of inflation year after year, they had to pay these very large penalties that were capped at 100%. They are no longer capped at 100%. And so insulin manufacturers responded by dropping their list prices.
So there are other ways that we can lower drug prices by, for example, impacting what PBMs are getting. Is that part of the approach that we should consider?
I think we absolutely should consider legislation that addresses PBMs. I think some of the things we've talked about here today, like spread pricing, the lack of transparency, all of these contribute to higher prices in the system. But I would say just on this question about insulin prices and why they came down so dramatically, it's a rule that forced manufacturers to pay penalties for raising list prices greater than the rate of inflation. And so I think with the IRA, we will see similar types of penalties moving forward. And I think, again, we need action with the pharmaceutical companies, and we also need action with PBMs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am very delighted to see a panel of all-female nominees. I also want to congratulate and thank the chairman for the leadership that he has provided in dealing with all of the nominees. And today is a very especially important day as we confirm the 200th judge, many of whom are women and representing minority communities. So to ensure the fitness of nominees, I ask each nominee, and we'll start with Judge Court and go right down the line, the following two initial questions. Since you became a legal adult, have you ever made unwanted requests for sexual favors or committed any verbal or physical harassment or assault of a sexual nature?
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
Have you ever faced discipline or entered into a settlement related to this kind of conduct?
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
Thank you. Judge Wang, I note that your parents are immigrants from South Korea. And so could you tell us a little bit about what it was like for you to grow up as well, I realize where you live, there are a number of South Koreans, but what it was like to grow up with immigrant parents and the challenges faced and how that prepares you to be a district court judge.
Thank you, Senator, for the question. There is a very large Korean population in Los Angeles. However, the schools that I attended when I was a child, I was either the only or one of very few number of Korean students. And so it was a challenging experience, but my parents also emphasized our rich cultural heritage. And so it has been important for me in honoring both their contributions and their sacrifices in this country to ensure that I always remember and uphold their traditions and their culture.
Can you extend my aloha to your parents? I know that they are not with us.
They're watching from home,
Yes,
but thank you very much.
Aloha to them. Judge Valenzuela, it's very clear to me that education has been a foundational for you and your family. Can you just talk a little bit more about how important it was for you to be bused to a whole another school from where you lived and what that experience inculcated in you or taught you?
Thank you for the question, Senator. Seeing it through a child's eyes, I was unhappy with the fact that I wasn't going to be going to the same schools as my 3 older siblings. But I saw very quickly, as far as, you know, a 12-year-old can process, that for whatever reason this change was happening, it was a good change. And I think just being physically located, both my middle school and high school directly across the street from the University of Arizona, was just a daily reminder that I could go to college. My siblings did not go to college. One of them later went back, but they did not go to college after high school. So just seeing the University of Arizona every day inspired me to work towards going to the University of Arizona. And then we had professors from the University of Arizona who actually came to our high school and taught some of the high school classes. And so I think just that connection to opportunity was an incredible benefit to me.
I very much agree with you. The exposure to higher education and those kinds of experiences are very meaningful. Judge Court, I assume that you consider diversity on the court to be very important. Yes?
I do.
Can you talk a little bit more about why?
Diversity on the court and diversity in the judiciary is very important for a number of reasons. I think that it goes a long way toward engendering trust in the judiciary when litigants and lawyers come to court and they see a diverse judiciary. I think it sends a message, especially in a community like Los Angeles that is so diverse with so many people who come from so many different places. It sends a signal that everyone has a chance of being treated equally because the demographics of the court reflect the demographics of the community in which it serves. Also, I think it's very important in terms of mentoring future professionals to come into the judicial profession. I participate on a regular basis in a couple of programs that the Los Angeles Superior Court operates in conjunction with some bar groups, including a program called the Power Lunch. And that is a lunch where we have judges, court reporters, bailiffs, interpreters, judicial assistants come and make presentations to groups of high school and middle school students who come on a field trip to the court to learn about the different career paths that there are in the justice system. And I think that's very important in terms of ensuring the future of the integrity of the judicial system.
Thank you, Senator Hirono.
Thank you for letting her finish her answer.
Thank you.
Senator.
Thank you very much. As long as Ms. Moore pointed out the fact that their report suggested 114 recommendations and that you had met with the testifiers today. So I'd like to ask all of you, starting with General Mingus. So of the 114 recommendations that GAO made, which one did you consider the most important to implement, and did you implement it? We'll just go down the list.
Yes, ma'am. It's hard to prioritize because they're all important, and we agree with all the findings and the recommendations. But if I were to pick one, it would probably be our fleet readiness, our weapons readiness is one of the areas that we acknowledge ourselves and are keenly focused on reversing that trend.
When you talk about fleet readiness, you're talking about what? There are a lot of elements that go into fleet readiness,
Tanks,
such as
Bradleys, our howitzers. Our fleet readiness currently is below the standards that we hold for ourselves, and part of that is a confluence of cascading of equipment from one unit to other, back to depots. Some of it is equipment that we've given to Ukraine and the supply parts that have to go to Ukraine, and so it's been a host of things that have caused this, and it's our standard for most of our fleet is about 90% operational readiness rates, and if you aggregate across the fleet, it's sitting at about 80%.
So, General, I would be interested to know how you're doing with the fleet readiness aspect of the GAO recommendations. So we will follow up with you on how you're doing with that. So, Admiral?
Thanks, Chair Hirono. I think I agree with General Mingus. We do take the GAO reports very seriously, read them, and try to really understand where we can make progress in the forward direction. I would say 3 reports stand out. One, the most latest report on fatigue, which applies to all the services, but the GAO has done reports for the Navy fatigue. So that's a serious report for us, especially given the manning situation that Ms. Maurer described. That's the second area, and that report was released on Monday. I haven't had a chance to completely digest the report, but there's much of it that we agree with and concur. And then finally, the readiness reporting on availability and modernization and maintenance. Those reports are impactful to us, and we are taking those very seriously.
So as we go down the list, my intention is that for the recommendations that have been suggested, and as you point out to this committee, what you consider to be an important recommendation that you are going to implement, my intention is to follow up to enable you to make those changes as suggested. So we'll continue down the list. General Mahoney.
Thanks, Senator, and agree thematically with my shipmate and my fighting mate over here. The one that stood out to me as a leader of Marines was the report on the condition of the barracks. If we are going to say that the bedrock of our fighting capability is the individual Marine, we have to ensure that there is a safe, sanitary, and secure place for them to come back after a hard day of training. That's the one that sticks out to me, man.
Senator, thanks. So as I look through the work the GAO has done, the portions that were most compelling to me was the work that the GAO has done, actually several reports, on the F-35 specifically. This is, of course, the backbone of the Air Force's future strike fighter fleet. In many ways, it is a fantastic platform. It's a fantastic capability we have, but it's extraordinarily complex, and it's complex in a number of ways. Number one, the structure of the program office, where we have multiple partners and allies that are involved in operating the platform, have a voice in how the platform is developed. Clearly, the Department of the Air Force and the Department of the Navy operate the U.S. fleets, and so there are differences in the way the Navy and the Marine Corps do supply and the way the Air Force does supply. And so anything that is a shared resource becomes very difficult for us to manage just inside the Department of Defense, much less with our partners and allies. And then finally, as we've found that we've become more and more interdependent with our partners and allies, the interoperability of the platform itself. We have to be able to share data. We have to be able to use common weapons. We have to service each other's airplanes. There are bureaucratic impediments in place that we're working hard to knock down that will allow us to get the maximum value out of that platform. But I would just tell you that the short answer to your question is that the things that I find most compelling in the GAO's work is that related to the F-35.
Well, good, because we've had issues with F-35 and its capabilities for what seems like a long time. So I would be interested to know how you're going to make the kind of changes that you just described. Okay, General Goodline.
Thank you, Senator. We've had a pretty strong partnership with the GAO going forward since we stood up in 2019. One of the major pivots that we've been doing in the United States Space Force is pivoting to an employed-in-place approach to warfighting. Whereas the other services fight forward, we fight from the homeland. In facilities that are heavily driven by software, we have to combine both our men and women in uniform, our civilians, and our contractors to get after our mission, and that requires us to change the way we measure readiness. For example, we have to measure the power and cooling of our facilities. We have to balance FSRM resources with weapon system sustainment resources. So we needed a completely new model to measure our readiness so that we could accurately report to the combatant commanders what they could guarantee to be provided by the United States Space Force during times of crisis or conflict. We are in the middle of that pivot. We will finish that pivot by this fall. And what you have seen in our readiness numbers, because we are changing the way we do it, is a significant decline in our readiness reporting. It's not necessarily because we have changed anything other than the fact that we are actually looking at what does it take to go to the fight, which is different than the system that we inherited from the United States Air Force. Over.
I think as a newest entity to be set up, it remains to be seen how you're going to measure your attainment of mission.
Thank you.
We should all be asking, why do the Republicans have such an obsession about controlling women's bodies? So this month is almost 2 years since the disastrous Dobbs decision. And Dobbs wreaked chaos and havoc, but there is more to come. Justice Thomas called for revisiting Griswold, which is the 1965 case protecting the right to contraception. And he pointed to the desire to revisit Griswold in his concurrence to the Dobbs decision. Excuse me. Justice Alito respects his wife's right to have a flag flying upside down, but he respects his wife's right to do that, apparently, but he doesn't give a rip about telling millions of women in this country that they have to have babies. I said, what's with that? And just this year, both of those justices suggested the Comstock Act, a Civil War era law, could be used to restrict access to reproductive services in this country. Republican states across the country have been blocking or rolling back access to contraception. Virginia's governor just vetoed a right to contraception bill earlier this year. Arizona Republicans blocked a similar bill in their legislature. Oklahoma's legislature have advanced a bill that would ban access to IUDs and other emergency contraceptives, and the list goes on. This abuse of power and control and Republicans' obsessions with controlling women's body continues. And we should ask, why is that? So Democrats know women should make decisions about their own bodies. And for myself, one of the major reasons that I ran for office was my desire to make sure that women had access to abortion, and we did. For 50 years, I had a right, a constitutional right to abortion, which this out-of-control Supreme Court majority just summarily took away. So our bill, the right to contraception bill, is very simple. It says we have a right to contraception, and the providers of contraception have a right to provide that contraception. It would help ensure people across the healthcare dimension that we will have access to the contraceptions, including IUDs and other methods, Plan B, and more. It doesn't force anybody to use contraception. It doesn't force anybody to provide contraception, but it's certainly for those who want to have it, who want to allow it, who want to provide it, will not be stopped by either federal or state law to do that. And tomorrow there's going to be a vote on this bill, and my question is, will Republicans stand with the women and families in this country or not? Mahalo. It's hard not to observe that the Republicans have an obsession with power and control over women. Remember the days when women couldn't vote, when women couldn't own property, when women couldn't even open a bank account? The Republicans want to get back to those days when power and control didn't flow to women in this country, but to them. So in a month, it will be 2 years since the Dobbs decision and all of the chaos that followed that decision. And now something as fundamental and common sense as access to contraception is on their hit list. Justice Alito respects his wife to her right to fly a flag upside down, but he has no problems telling millions of women in our country what to do with our bodies. Obsession with power and control over women. That is what's happening. And then Justice Thomas, as my colleagues have said, he said he would like to revisit Griswold, a 1965 decision of the Supreme Court that dealt with contraception rights. And whenever a Supreme Court justice, especially in the MAGA far-right justice, says he wants to revisit a case, you can bet that he's looking to overturn. So this is real. And as mentioned, there are states that are already making sure that access to contraception is not protected. So the states are mentioned: Arizona, Oklahoma, these states. And, you know, just to let you know that every opportunity, every way that the MAGA Republicans and their supporters on the Supreme Court will look to anything that they can to restrict our right to our freedoms, is that the two justices, Alito and Thomas, have also talked about the Comstock Act, a Civil War era law that could be used to restrict access to reproductive care nationwide. Virginia, Arizona, Oklahoma, other states, they are doing their best. Republicans in those states are doing their best to deny access to contraception. So Democrats know that women, it is our decision, our freedom, to decide when to have a child, family planning, all of that. That means that we should have access to contraception. In fact, just as I was walking here, a reporter asked me what I thought about the Republicans saying, oh, they can't support this bill because it's too broad. And I said, what is so broad about it? It simply says that we have a right to contraception, Americans, all of us, and that the providers also have a right to provide it. What is overbroad about that? I think it's really pathetic that the Republicans, the MAGA Republicans and their ilk, are looking for every excuse to not vote for a bill, this bill, the Right to Contraception Act, that will really provide the freedoms that they are so busy taking away in their obsession with wanting power and control over women in this country. So the Democrats are going to continue to fight back And that's what we're doing today. I'm glad to join all of my colleagues here. And I think we're going to hear from the wonderful Tammy Duckworth. It's hard not to observe that the Republicans have an obsession with power and control over women. Remember the days when women couldn't vote, when women couldn't own property, when women couldn't even open a bank account? The Republicans want to get back to those days when power and control didn't flow to women in this country, but to them. So in a month, it will be 2 years since the Dobbs decision and all of the chaos that followed that decision. And now something as fundamental and common sense as access to contraception is on their hit list. Justice Alito respects his wife to her right to fly a flag upside down, but he has no problems telling millions of women in our country what to do with our bodies. Obsession with power and control over women. That is what's happening. And then Justice Thomas, as my colleagues have said, he said he would like to revisit Griswold, a 1965 decision of the Supreme Court that dealt with contraception rights. And whenever a Supreme Court justice, especially in the MAGA far-right justice, says he wants to revisit a case, you can bet that he's looking to overturn. So this is real. And as mentioned, there are states that are already making sure that access to contraception is not protected. So the states are mentioned: Arizona, Oklahoma, these states. And, you know, just to let you know that every opportunity, every way that the MAGA Republicans and their supporters on the Supreme Court will look to anything that they can to restrict our right to our freedoms, is that the two justices, Alito and Thomas, have also talked about the Comstock Act, a Civil War era law that could be used to restrict access to reproductive care nationwide. Virginia, Arizona, Oklahoma, other states, they are doing their best. Republicans in those states are doing their best to deny access to contraception. So Democrats know that women, it is our decision, our freedom, to decide when to have a child, family planning, all of that. That means that we should have access to contraception. In fact, just as I was walking here, a reporter asked me what I thought about the Republicans saying, oh, they can't support this bill because it's too broad. And I said, what is so broad about it? It simply says that we have a right to contraception, Americans, all of us, and that the providers also have a right to provide it. What is overbroad about that? I think it's really pathetic that the Republicans, the MAGA Republicans and their ilk, are looking for every excuse to not vote for a bill, this bill, the Right to Contraception Act, that will really provide the freedoms that they are so busy taking away in their obsession with wanting power and control over women in this country. So the Democrats are going to continue to fight back, and that's what we're doing today. I'm glad to join all of my colleagues here. And I think we're going to hear from the wonderful Tammy Duckworth.
The senator from Hawaii.
Mr. President, I rise today deeply concerned that the far-right majority on the Supreme Court is preparing to sow further chaos in our country. Any day now, the court is expected to rule on 2 cases pertaining to the Chevron doctrine, a 40-year-old doctrine with roots that go back to our country's founding, that is critical to a functioning federal government. The Chevron doctrine is pretty simple. It recognizes that Congress delegates authority to technical experts at federal agencies so that those agencies can effectively and efficiently implement federal laws in their areas of expertise in line with congressional intent. As a result, for nearly 4 decades, courts generally have deferred to reasonable interpretations by administrative agencies when the law is unclear or ambiguous. In fact, before 1984, lower court judges were criticized for overriding agency experts and imposing their own policy views, and that is why the court handed down the Chevron decision in the first place. The Chevron doctrine was originally favored by conservative judges, including the conservative majority on the Supreme Court during the Reagan administration, who viewed it as a check against judicial activism. In recent years, however, many on the right have turned against the Chevron doctrine, viewing it as an impediment to their efforts to consolidate power and enable far-right judges to legislate from the bench. Now, the same far-right ideologues that fought to end Roe are all in for ending Chevron as well. Justice Gorsuch, one of the most outspoken critics of Chevron, has gone so far as to call for the court to give the doctrine, quote, a tombstone no one can miss, end quote. And the so-called Alliance Defending Freedom, the same group leading the charge to eliminate access to mifepristone as approved by the FDA, has called for the Chevron doctrine to go, asserting without evidence that it allows agency experts to, quote, impose personal political agendas that Congress has not authorized, end quote. To be clear, this case is not about the so-called major question doctrine, but about the sorts of day-to-day decisions that federal agency experts make when implementing laws. Overturning Chevron would undermine these sorts of everyday decisions, and in doing so, jeopardize the regulatory system on which much of our country and our economy rests. It would empower the hundreds of individual federal judges to overrule carefully considered rulemaking decisions by agency experts, turning a consistent regulatory framework into a chaotic mess of conflicting opinions. At its core, this case about who should be making policy decisions on issues that affect our lives, subject matter experts or federal judges. Who gets to determine the safety of the air we breathe, environmental scientists at the EPA or federal judges? Who decides whether or not a new drug is actually effective, doctors at the FDA or federal judges? Who determines whether nursing homes are meeting safety standards, elder care experts at HHS or federal judges? With no disrespect to our federal judges, they lack the expertise to make these kinds of decisions. And while Congress enacts legislation at a high level, it recognizes that the institutional capacity and expertise to implement legislation exists within executive agencies. That is why federal agencies exist, to implement informed, evidence-based regulations that provide a level of regulatory certainty and stability. Eliminating Chevron now, after more than 4 decades, would sow chaos and confusion on agency actions moving forward, as well as the nearly 18,000 federal cases that have been decided based on the Chevron doctrine. And even if the court stops short of fully eliminating Chevron, significantly narrowing it will have much the same effect. Overturning Chevron is yet one more component of the far-right broader agenda to capture the courts, advance their conservative ideological agenda, and hollow out our regulatory system. The court will hand down a decision in this highly important case in a matter of days. And we will see whether this case becomes yet another cautionary tale for a court that has been busy overturning decades of precedent, sowing chaos left, right, and center.
Mr. President, thank you. I yield. Mr. Chairman, congratulations to all of you on your nominations. I ask these initial questions of every nominee who comes before any of the committees on which I sit. So I'll just go right down the line, starting with Ms. Costello. Since you became a legal adult, have you ever made unwanted requests for sexual favors or committed any verbal or personal harassment or assault of a sexual nature?
No, Senator.
No, Senator, I have not.
Have you ever faced discipline or entered into a settlement related to this kind of conduct?
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
Ms. Provenzino, I understand that you are currently one of 5 assistant U.S. attorneys focused on DOJ's initiative on missing and murdered Indigenous persons. Can you tell the committee about your work in this program and why it is important?
Thank you, Senator. When I started as an AUSA, I had an opportunity to work on violent crime in Indian country. And as you're aware, the violence against Native women is much higher than any other community in the United States. And so you have a great need and serious circumstances without always the law enforcement support to be able to investigate and tackle those cases. So the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Persons Program in DOJ is a direct response to bipartisan legislation from this body through the Savannahs Act and the Not Invisible Act. And it's to try to rectify that wrong, to make sure we have adequate resources to investigate and prosecute crimes in Indian country, and that we can provide sufficient training to our law enforcement partners. So it's a great honor to have been selected as one of 5 to do this work.
I think that is critical work, and I am well aware that Native Hawaiian women and girls are also have a higher degree of this kind of abuse. Judge Wise, you have written about the importance of diversity on the bench, and frankly, I believe that the makeup of our judiciary should reflect the diversity of our nation, and yet there's some people who take every opportunity to attack DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Places like Florida and Texas, where certain books are prevented from being made available because generally they depict diverse characters that do not meet certain people's notions of what is appropriate, or where certain history cannot be taught. See, there are people in this country who are afraid of DEI. Now, I come from a state where we celebrate the diversity of our cultures, and all of the people who have come to Hawaii, immigrants. Aside from the indigenous Native Hawaiian people, the rest of us are immigrants. We celebrate diversity, and one of the things that I should think reflects the equality of our country is to embrace diversity. So I applaud you for recognizing how important it is. And in fact, you might want to take a moment, I wasn't here earlier, why you think that diverse judiciary is important. And by the way, your comment about the Trump nominees, people may not like it, but it happens to be true. That there was, in my view, his nominees did not reflect the diversity of our country. So could you just express why you think diversity on our bench is important?
Thank you. And to be clear, I have made no criticism about any particular nominee from any president. Collectively, I think it's incredibly important that we have a diverse judiciary. And I really do mean diversity in every respect. I mean race, but I also mean from a socioeconomic standpoint, whether people are veterans, whether, from a gender perspective, certainly, but also in terms of life experience that they bring. I think it very much affects the trust that people have in our judiciary. But I do firmly believe, as somebody who was a public school teacher, that it reinforces the American dream. It's very difficult, no matter whether it's the judiciary or something else. I think it's very difficult for children to see themselves doing something if they've never seen anyone who looks like them do that thing. And I'm sincere when I said, I didn't know any lawyers and I didn't know any judges growing up. When Ronald Reagan appointed Sandra Day O'Connor in 1981, I was in high school, and it was transformative.
It was such a small thing and such an enormous thing, and it changed, I think, for a lot of people, how they viewed the American dream. I just didn't realize it was something possible for women to do. And I suspect, although it was shortly before I was born, that when Thurgood Marshall was appointed to the United States Supreme Court, many people felt the same way.
Well, there are not very many Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islanders serving in the U.S. Senate. I happen to be one of two. And believe me, I get my share of people who are outraged at the fact that I am here. Yeah, well, you can imagine what I think about that. So can you just tell me briefly what your approach is? How would you make decisions in the cases that come before you?
I've heard a lot of cases in a lot of different areas of law. I mean, I was a prosecutor first, before coming to the bench. But now the work primarily I've done on the bench has been in the areas of family law and in civil, complex civil now, and then some work from appeals. And all of it is essentially the same way. You start with a law and you apply it every time in all instances, irrespective of whether it comports with your personal views.
Okay, what I'm hearing, thank you, Mr. Chairman, is that you will be fair and objective and apply the facts to the law. That's all I can ask of any of our judicial nominees. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for coming to testify. I would ask that our testifiers speak directly into the mic. I'm having a little trouble hearing you. As we sit here listening to your testimony and the questions being asked, perhaps this is for Mr. Stern and Ms. Berry, is the kind of hate that we're talking about today, whether it's anti-Jewish hate, sexual orientation hate crimes, anti-Hispanic, anti-Black, anti-Muslim, anti-Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, anti-Haitians. Is this kind of hate learned? Mr. Stern?
Yes, but it also is not just the people are being polluted. Part of the challenge is that as human beings, we're sort of ordained, our brains function to see who's us and who's them. And sometimes the dehumanization and demonization of that becomes problematic in terms of particular groups. It can lead to genocide. It could lead to the types of hate crimes we're seeing. So I think that the more that we focus on that this is a normal human reaction, whether it's on politics too, the better able we're going to be able to handle situations like this. And to just piggyback on one thing that I agree and disagree with my friend the rabbi, I don't think on the campus we're going to totally dispel this with discipline. There are certainly places where you need to have things, the police come in and so forth, but that should be at the last result. The education should be the response to it. And one person I would suggest this committee hear from at some point is Michael Roth, who's Jewish at Wesleyan, who basically said, look, as long as you're not harassing, you're not intimidating, you're going to be okay. You want to pitch a tent, and we're going to bring people in there to have conversations. To me, that's a much better approach in the long term.
I agree with you. And to the extent that this kind of attitude, and yes, there's human nature aspect to it, that maybe we're never going to be able to eliminate all forms of racism and those kinds of attitude, but it seems to me that education plays a role, and one must start young at teaching against the kind of hatred that we see around us. And as we sit here listening to anti-Jewish hate, it was not very long ago that we were actually watching videos of AAPI communities being attacked and even murdered, which led to the COVID-19 hate crimes legislation, which was a bill that I sponsored, and Senator Blumenthal's No Hate Act was included, which led to much better reporting, albeit it's still the lack of adequate reporting of all manner of hate crimes is recognized, and we can do better. And I'd like to, do you agree, Mr. Stern, that we can do better in terms of educating at a much younger age about the impact of hateful rhetoric and to do something more at an early age to address the learning of hate?
Yeah, I think we could do lots of things at the early age. I think also one of the things I put in my written testimony is the idea of bringing people, basically when they're graduating from high school, from different backgrounds together and sending them out to do a project for somebody else. There's some social psychology that suggests that may reduce bigotry. And on the campus itself, let me tell you, at Bard, I had a colleague who saw people spitting out words in a very hostile manner about Zionism, genocide, ethnic cleansing, anti-Semitism. She said, we're in a college. Why don't we teach about it? And she put together a course that helps students not only understand what these terms mean, but why people hear them differently.
So are colleges creating such courses to enhance the dialogue and discussion?
That's the thing that distressed me most over the summer. I saw a lot of reporting on what the new policies are going to be, and I get it, administrations don't want to get things out of control, but I would have loved to have seen what are the 20 new courses we're offering, what are the new hate studies programs that we're putting together. So when I do workshops with students and faculty and others, and they understand some of the brain science and social psychology about how we get into these, heated us versus them buckets, and you intellectually understand that, you're better able to then negotiate these issues.
In the little bit of time that I have left, I agree with you, and I hope that college administrators and leaders are listening to you. And even as we speak, in Springfield, Ohio, the Haitian community there is being targeted, and the town has been targeted by hate-fueled attacks. And bomb threats, et cetera. In your studies, have you seen minority communities being targeted like this? And can we expect that there will be further escalation of hatred against the Haitians in Springfield, Ohio, and maybe it will spread to other communities? Can you briefly respond?
Yeah, I am deeply concerned about anybody targeting a whole community, let alone with rumors, but you pick one.
Lies.
Lies, right? And what Mark was saying before too. You go and you stigmatize one entire group because of somebody, somebody that's perceived as part of that group, and bring hate. The problem to me, and this I don't have a solution for, is that hate has always worked in politics. Otherwise, politicians wouldn't use it. And I think that the more that we stand up together and say we're going to call it out, especially when it's from people on our side, the less likely we'll be able to see this type of rhetoric expand.
If I may.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm over my time.
Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations to all of the nominees, and welcome to your family and friends who are here to support you. I asked the following two initial questions of our nominees before any of the committees on which I sit, and so I will ask this question, and we'll just start with Judge Brandisi and go down the line. Since you became a legal adult, have you ever made unwanted requests for sexual favors or committed any verbal or physical harassment or assault of a sexual nature?
No, Senator.
No, Senator. No, Senator.
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
No, Senator.
Have you ever faced discipline or entered into a settlement related to this kind of conduct?
No, Senator.
No, Senator. No, Senator.
No, Senator.
No, Senator. No, Senator.
Thank you. For Mr. Brandisi, you served in the U.S. House of Representatives, and you were asked about a particular bill. I take it that you did introduce a number of bills that expressed positions that you had. But as a judge, I have to assume that you will follow appropriate precedent and that you will not be judging cases on the basis of any personal or ideological position that you may have taken in the past.
That's correct, Senator. As a judge for the last 2 years, I'm very comfortable following precedent. I do it on a daily basis in my courtroom, and if I'm fortunate to be confirmed, I will follow the precedent of the Supreme Court and the Second Circuit.
Mr. Desai, I understand that you are the son of immigrants. So I think that having that kind of a background and your parents coming to this country to start a new life for everyone is a very unique kind of experience. Can you share with this committee a bit about how that experience influenced possibly your career choices, your career path?
Thank you, Senator. When I was a child, my parents spoke often about the values in America, such as justice, equality, and the rule of law. And I don't think it's any surprise that both my sisters and I all decided to attend law school for those reasons. We were all drawn to it because we believe firmly in justice. I hope to uphold those values if I'm fortunate to be confirmed as a district court judge, and I hope to continue the dream that my parents started when they moved to this country.
Ms. Is it Combe?
Yes, Coombe.
Coombe, thank you. You have spent your whole career dedicated to public service, and this is a question that I would have for others on the panel. That can you tell us why you're so dedicated to public service? Because as a lawyer, you can choose between spending your time in public service or in private practice. Would you like to share how it is that you have spent your entire career in public service?
Yes, thank you, Senator. I was inspired and saw firsthand my parents' dedication to lives of public service. As I mentioned, they gave their careers to government and education. And I love our country and I love our communities. And it's just been a privilege and an honor to be able to work for the federal government my entire career. And as an assistant United States attorney, to be charged with upholding the rule of law, protecting constitutional rights, and trying to do justice.
Thank you. Mr. Desai, you have dedicated a significant amount of time doing pro bono work. Why is pro bono work so important to you?
So, Senator, my most impactful pro bono case was the Graves v. Arpaio case, and it was important for the firm to take that case because we were representing individuals, a plaintiff class of pretrial detainees in the jails, who had no ability to effectively advocate for themselves on a very important issue of constitutional law. In that case, after a 3-week evidentiary hearing, we were able to successfully get a significant order improving jail conditions in the jails.
Thank you. One last question for Ms. Johnson. On top of your responsibilities as a U.S. attorney, you serve as co-chair of the hiring committee and participate in educational panels about careers in public service. What are some lessons you've learned as a member of the hiring committee, and what factors do you consider when reviewing an applicant, and how do you encourage new lawyers to consider a career in public service? 3-part question.
Thank you, Senator. Serving on the hiring committee has been an incredible honor in the U.S. Attorney's Office, and factors we consider are just basic litigation skills, but more importantly, integrity and good judgment. And what I've learned from serving on that committee is that being able to do justice comes in all forms, and it takes all types. You can be gregarious, you can be a quiet personality, but we have an incredible group of prosecutors in our office, and it's because we look for the best and the brightest.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to each of you for being here and for your families for supporting you. Judge Brindisi, let's start with